Welcome to a Warhammer Underworlds battle report between Thundrik's Profiteers and Lady Harrow's Mournflight. This game was played online using online tools, and I have recreated it here for the tabletop to show on YouTube. This game was played just after the release of Crimson Court, the starter set, and the Essentials pack, so it is using all cards up to and including those. In this game, I was piloting the Thundrik's Profiteers on the right. The Lady Harrow's player won the roll-off, elected to place down the first board, which was Ravaged Hall, and I aligned Abandoned Lair in a straight-up fashion. I declined to put down a lethal token, and they placed one right next to Objective 4. My opponent opted to discard his objective hand, which included Dominion of Death, Nexus of Terror, and Great Gains. There's a lot of glory out the window on turn 1, but it's a little too slow to hold on to in the early turns. I opted to drop my power hand, which included Lethal Ward, Ancestral Fortitude, Great Fortitude, Toxic Gases, and Eagle Eye. Toxic Gases and Lethal Ward are really powerful cards, especially since my opponent will be holding objectives, or generally will for this warband. But 3 upgrades is a little hard to hold on to in round 1, so I opted to discard them and go for a new power hand. I drew into Unnatural Truce, Dwarven Resilience, Magmalt Draught, Gauntlet of Dominance, and Fighter's Ferocity. Again, this is 3 upgrades, but this time I have a draw 2 card in hand, and Dwarven Resilience is really powerful at keeping yourself alive in the early turns. I kept my objective hand, which is Bolt Conquest, Winged Death, and Dominant Position. Dominant Position is a little bit difficult in this matchup, and Winged Death is not terribly reliable, but Bolt Conquest is really reliable, and Winged Death is potentially doable depending on how my first couple actions go, so I decided to hold on to them. Despite my opponent finishing deploying first, I rolled 2 crits in the roll-off and forced him to act first. So for his first activation, he simply drew a power card, and then passed in the power step. I played Unnatural Truce, getting myself Distraction and Mirror Move, which I thought would be very useful later on going for Dominant Position. For my first action, I charged Bjorgen onto Objective 2, taking a shot at Lady Harrow, getting a crit, but my opponent got both a crit and a success, preventing me from driving her back. While this didn't do anything, and even if it did, would have only done 1 damage, it does get me an easy Inspire off of scoring Bolt Conquest. I Inspire Thundrik to keep him safe. My opponent plays Spectral Wings in the power step, to which I pass. Lady Harrow takes a long 6-hex charge against Iron Hail, passing through Thundrik to Inspire, and rolls just a single success, to which I roll a failed defense, killing Iron Hail and getting Harrow 1 glory for the kill. If that wasn't enough, he also scores Gather Momentum and Winged Death for the distance traveled, and Surge of Aggression for gaining the Primacy token, netting 4 glory off of a single kill. After that, we both pass in the power step, and I charge Lund onto Objective 4. This is to play both towards Dominant Position and Steady Aim. Unfortunately, I miss with the attack, but I'm still on the objective. We both pass in the power step again, and my opponent moves Kaitha through Objective 1 onto Objective 3, scoring Fleeting Memories, a really strong draw for my opponent after discarding that first initial 7 glory. We both pass again in the power step, and I take a short charge with Alan Sin, just hoping to get steady aim and put a little bit of plink damage on Lady Harrow with a single hit, but Harrow blocks with a crit. In the power step, my opponent equips the Anguished One with Crown of the Dead, and after we both pass for his final activation, he just moves Anguished One onto Objective 1, then uses Crown of the Dead to draw 2 and discard Outrun Death. We both pass in the power step, and for my final activation, I charge Drax Skewer up the board, taking a swing at Kaitha. I roll a hit and a crit, my opponent only rolls a dodge, and I kill her, getting myself steady aim as well as the primacy token on top of the glory for the kill. I use the scored glory to inspire Drax Skewer, and draw into Live by the Code, which will be a nice easy score at the end of the round. As a reaction to the attack, Lady Harrow pushes herself 1 hex towards Lund, and I use Mirror Move to push the Anguished One off of her objective. At this point, I'm feeling pretty good about both Live by the Code and Dominant Position, but then my opponent plays Chilling Scream, preventing me from playing power cards for the rest of the power step. He then proceeds to Distraction Lund into the Lethal Hex, as well as sidestep Anguished One back onto her objective, also equipping her with Dominant Defender, Gauntlet of Dominance, and Great Fortitude. Looking back, this probably could have been prevented by just playing Distraction before the final power step. I know Chilling Scream is a very common card for Lady Harrow's decks, and they usually save it for this final power step, as they did here. Getting Anguished 1/2 hexes away could have gotten me dominant position, but I didn't think about it, and it cost me 2 glory. In the end phase, luckily, my opponent doesn't score any of his objectives, and simply draws up to a new power hand. I score Live by the Code, which I use to inspire Lund, and get an extra spent glory from the Primacy. I spend 3 glory to put Gauntlet of Dominance and Fighter's Ferocity on my leader, as well as Magmalt Draught on Lund, who is able to be one-shot at this point by the inspired Lady Harrow. I discard Dominant Position because I think at this point it's unlikely to be scored. My opponent still has at least 2 distractions, if not more, in his deck, and I have already used Mirror Move and discarded Toxic Gases, so the likelihood of being able to be on more than my opponent is pretty low at this point. I then draw into Hidden Purpose and Aggressive Strategy for objectives, and draw into Mischievous Spirits, Duel of Wits, and Nightmare in the Shadows as my power cards. Looking at this power hand, I probably should have kept Dominant Position, and probably would have been able to score it, but I went with my gut, and we'll see if it pays off in the end. My opponent wins the roll-off for round 2, and elects to go first with Lady Harrow. Takes a swing at Lund, getting 1 hit against 0 defense. I reduce the damage from 3 down to 2 with Magmalt Draught, and he pushes me off the lethal hex. In the power step, he uses Frightful Aspect to pull Lund right back on, killing him. No further power cards are played, and in my first activation, I charge Drax Skewer onto Objective 3 to take a swing at the Maiden. I failed to hit, but the movement does give me the positioning for Hidden Purpose, allowing me to inspire Allinson. My opponent responds to this attack by using Lady Harrow's reaction to push 1 hex closer adjacent to Allinson. I draw into To the End, which I'm probably not going to be able to score this turn, but is pretty reliable at this point in the game. In the power step, I play Distraction to push Lady Harrow 1 hex away from Allinson, as she's still doing 3 damage, and even with the better defense characteristic, Allinson is still in range to be killed. Then, as some extra insurance, I play Dwarven Resilience to further discourage Lady Harrow from making any charges. It must have worked because, as the second activation, my opponent simply draws a power card. In hindsight, it probably wasn't necessary to use both Distraction and Dwarven Resilience to prevent the kill, but with my opponent having 2 kills under his belt, I was a little worried about him running away with the game. We both pass in the power step, and as my second activation, I take a shot with Thundrik at Lady Harrow, which misses. For his third activation, my opponent takes a charge with Lady Harrow against Allinson, getting 1 hit to my failed defense, getting Lady Harrow her 3rd kill of the game, and Primacy once again. In the power step, I use Nightmare in the Shadows to push Lady Harrow onto the lethal hex, getting her in range of Thundrik, hoping to get a couple more shots in before the end of the round. My opponent responds to my Nightmare in the Shadows with Duel of Wits, drawing 2 cards. I respond with my own Duel of Wits, drawing Gauntlet of Command and Seek the Sky Vessel. I spend a glory to put Gauntlet of Command on Thundrik, activating both Gauntlet of Command and Gauntlet of Dominance. For my third activation, I take a shot at Lady Harrow with Thundrik, getting a crit and a hit, which he fails to stop, and with Fighter's Ferocity that deals 3 damage to the enemy leader. My opponent spends 2 glory for putting Gauntlet of Command and then Great Strength on the Anguished One. With Anguished One now having 4 damage, I decide to use Seek the Sky Vessel to move Draxskewer and Thundrik further away, but my opponent uses Call of the Grave and pulls Draxskewer 2 hexes back towards the Anguished One. For good measure, he also uses Malkin Grace to give the Anguished One a lot of extra speed. In the final enemy activation, the Anguished One charges through Draxskewer, Malkin Grace giving him the extra speed needed to inspire afterwards, and rolls 2 dice. Missing the first time and then re-rolling into a hit. I get a shield on defense, blocking the hit, and he declines to push Draxskewer. For my final activation, Thundrik takes 1 more shot at Lady Harrow, getting just 1 success, but my opponent fails to block. dealing enough damage to take the enemy leader out of action, getting me primacy, and also scoring me winged death. I have no fighters left to inspire, and I draw into great gains. As a reaction to the attack, I use Gauntlet of Command to push Draxskewer 1 hex away from the Anguished One, forcing a charge in the next activation if he wants to go first. My opponent scores first in the end phase, scoring Awesome Predator for the 4 damage attack on the Anguished One, and deciding to discard Ghostly Torment as there's no wounded fighters and scoring in the next turn will be difficult. He puts Swooping Dash on the Anguished One and draws back up to a full hand. I don't score any of my cards in the end phase, but I get 1 Spent Glory for the Primacy token. I discard Great Gains as I don't think it's reliable enough to score. I then consider discarding Aggressive Strategy as 2 of my 3 remaining objective cards are Surges, decide to keep it, and draw immediately into Path to Victory. That's how it goes sometimes. I keep Mischievous Spirits as there's only 3 power cards left in my deck, and draw to a full hand. Third and final round, my opponent wins the roll-off to go first again, makes a 6 hex charge through a blocked hex, ending next to Draxskewer. He rolls 3 dice, missing everything, and then rerolls 1 into a hit, and I roll into a shield to block it. He does score Inescapable Hunger and Cover Ground, however. In my first activation, I simply cycle out Path to Victory, discarding it and drawing into Show of Force, which I score immediately for Thundrik's upgrades, scoring that for 1 glory, and then drawing into Headshot. In his second activation, my opponent simply puts the Maiden on guard. After passing that power step, I charge with Draxskewer, pass the Anguished One onto the objective, and hit her with 2 hits, which she fails to block. I then push Anguished One back 1 hex into range of Thundrik for the follow-up attack. In his third activation, my opponent does a hard pass as he doesn't want to move the Maiden and has no cards left to draw. In his power step, however, he adds Veil of Grief to his Anguished One, bringing it to 4 wounds remaining. In my third activation, Thundrik takes a shot at the Anguished One, getting a crit and a hit. My opponent fails to stop it, and thanks to the crit and Fighter's Ferocity, deals exactly 4 damage and takes the Anguished One out of action, getting an extra glory for having a fighter with more than 6 wounds die and scoring Headshot. In the power step, my opponent equips the Maiden with Proud Runner, and then in his final activation moves the Maiden 5 hexes to take the Primacy token. In my final activation, I hard pass as I cannot reach that fighter with Thundrik, and I don't have any cards left to draw. Moving into the final end phase, my opponent doesn't score his last objective and simply gets 1 Spent Glory for the Primacy token. I score to the end as well as Aggressive Strategy, bringing the final score to 11-17 in the Profiteers' favor. Overall, I felt most of this game was very close, with both warbands being within a glory or 2 of each other for most of it. I felt like I was on the back foot in the mid-game after having my dominant position thwarted, and an unupgraded Lady Harrow was able to clean up half of my warband by herself with a series of good attacks. I was able to come back mainly due to his unfortunate objective draw in the opening hand, which really limited his glory ceiling for the rest of the game, though it did mean that he scored everything else pretty smoothly. This game was pretty indicative of most of my other games with this deck. Great Gains and Path to Victory are pretty difficult to score consistently, and I've been looking for replacements for those. I found the surges in this deck to be pretty varied in consistency, as Steady Aim, Headshot, and Winged Death are pretty dice reliant for a deck that otherwise scores regardless of dice rolls. In this game, they didn't break my hand for too long, but plenty of games I've had to discard Headshot in particular due to not rolling crits. Overall, I find Profiteers to be pretty fun, as they play a bit different from most other aggro warbands, and their matchups vary quite a bit. If you like this short form type of battle report, please let me know in the comments down below. I really liked making it, so I'll try to do some more in the future. Thanks for stopping by.